fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and International Relations expert. Thanks for coming in, Emmanuel.
Good evening.
Now, as I mentioned, Michael Gove here primarily in Israel to talk about coronavirus, because that is his responsibilities in the cabinet, the British cabinet. But of course, the Israeli readout of their meeting did mention Iran. Of course, the UK, a signatory to the and a member of those talks going on in Vienna. And perhaps, though, is there a possibility for Israel, because they know the stance of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to maybe use the UK as a conduit for expressing its concerns, its doubts to those other signatories, maybe less sympathetic to Israel in Vienna?
Well, the position of the UK is mostly sympathetic to Israel's concerns, and don't forget that this is a post-EU UK. It's no longer a member of the European Union. It's now an independent actor internationally. And as far as Israel is concerned, of course, basically the signatories of the JCPOA are divided between the West and China and Russia on the other hand. And here, I think what Israel is trying to do is to build a kind of a coalition between the U.S., the UK, but also France and Germany, when we know that Russia and China are actually much more sympathetic to the position of the Iranians,
sure,
especially the Chinese. So together with the UK, Germany, and France, that's already three countries. And facing China and Russia, and I think this is what Israel is trying to do. But again, at the end of the day, whether or not we get a sympathetic ear in the UK, a lot will depend on whether or not the Iranians are really willing to compromise, and mostly if the Chinese and Russians are going to play ball, which is very unlikely.
Right now. We haven't seen that from the Iranians yet, but there were comments made just this week from Iranian officials that sounded perhaps the most positive to this point, saying there's been some progress in these working group talks without really giving any kind of specifics. How do you read what's happening now in those Vienna discussions?
Well, the Iranians are testing the Biden administration, trying to see how much the U.S. is willing to give away. Don't forget that they look at the Middle East as a whole, and they know that the Biden administration already announced that it would withdraw from Afghanistan. And the question is, does the Biden administration today has the backbone really and the willingness to be tough on Iran, to be willing to reimpose sanctions, and also don't forget that the main headache for the Biden administration is really the threat from China. I mean, at least this geopolitical confrontation between the United States and China. So the Iranians know that. On the other hand, they need a lifting of sanctions, and what they're doing really is to test whether or not the Biden administration is willing to show any flexibility and is willing to sign an agreement almost at any price that would basically push off a little bit the sunset clause and make sure that the mechanism for checking the activity of the Iranians would be more trustworthy and tougher.
Right. Now, there was another very interesting development earlier this week, which was first reports of the first direct talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran, a suggestion that maybe that focus could be on the Yemen conflict, which, of course, is a very pressing issue for the Saudis. But we could have to assume that the nuclear agreement issue is certainly either a part of that discussion or is motivating. And what can we read in the fact that that Riyadh and Tehran have resumed dialogue?
So I think very clearly Riyadh is sending a message to Washington to say, look, you're leaving Afghanistan, you are negotiating with the Iranians, and you no longer support us, the Saudis, when it comes to Yemen. So the Saudis are very concerned, and they're sending a message to the Americans saying, look, at the end of the day, we can also negotiate directly with the Iranians, and maybe we'll reach an agreement with them over Yemen, this war that the Saudis have been fighting for over 6 years, and they've been failing to impose their will. And basically, I think they're sending a message to the Americans: don't abandon us, because we'll be able to maybe find an arrangement with the Iranians. And don't forget that those negotiations, those talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran are taking place where? In Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, which is basically a country that the Americans left. The government of Iraq is mostly controlled by the Iranians. And this sends a very clear message, I think, of the Saudis vis-a-vis the Americans, because Iraq is very much at the center of this global contest between the Sunnis and the Shias in the Middle East. And so basically the Saudis have been basically abandoned by the Biden administration over Yemen, are sending a warning, I would say, to Washington saying, be tough on Iran, otherwise we'll have to, we'll have to talk to them directly, the same way that, Iran has the upper hand in Iraq, which is where these talks are taking place.
Right. You have to assume those talks could have been kept secret, perhaps, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but someone clearly, and perhaps Saudi Arabia, wanted the news of that.
That's the whole point. To send, as I said, a warning to Washington.
Right. A message being sent to Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Thank you for joining us.